So process a chrome cobalt partial lower. Kennedy Class 1 bilateral frame saddles with a chrome plate. So this one, with it being a plate, I can leave all this section there, and I'm just going to cover this in plaster. If this was a bar, I would have cut this section away as well, so the bar would have been free and I could have encased all this in plaster. But because this is a plate, I can just cover that. I'll use the large half of the flask, and again I want to push this down as far as I can in the flask, because I want all this protected by the walls of this flask. So I want to sink as much as I can inside it. So I'm going to use just some plaster and water. Just normal plaster of Paris or surgical plaster. Not too much water in that. Okay, and just load it into the large half of the flask. And I'm going to protect the sides of the tube because I want to keep as much plaster away from there as possible. And I'm just going to keep my fingers there while I press this down. Okay. And I want to cover everything apart from the teeth and the wax. So I'm covering all the chrome cobalt at the front, so it's supported and encased in the plaster, and that way it won't move during the flasking process. So I want to keep that exactly in the position that it is. So there you go, that's completely encased now. I'm just going to let that set a little tiny bit, and I'm going to remove all the excess plaster away and smooth it down a little bit. And this one doing this. Just clean all the excess out of the bowl. You might find this easier to pick it up whilst you're doing it, but you've got to be careful that you don't push the little table out from underneath the flask, the little disc, with your finger. And I'm trimming this down, all the excess off. Remember, everything gets encased apart from the teeth and the wax. This chrome must be held within the plaster all the time, otherwise during the packing stage, if the chrome moves, it won't fit the patient. So we've done the traying, and we want it to remain exactly as the traying was. So just remove any undercuts from this. Okay, so now I can just smooth this off. Again, I just need this to set a little bit, so it's still a little bit soft, and I can smooth it off under the water. Give that a couple of minutes to set. Okay, so while it's still not set, I just want to run it under the water without the full flow of water going onto it, because it'll just run the plaster away. Just want to smooth all this down to get this surface as smooth as possible, so the next lot of plaster that we put on won't stick to it. If you just run directly the water directly on top of this, it will just damage the plaster and run the plaster away, so you've got to be careful. Just do a little bit at a time. You can see now that's nice and smooth without any undercuts on there. There's nothing for the other plaster to stick to. I sometimes use a palette brush just for cleaning the excess away. Or you can let it set and go hard and then clean it away with a Lacron or another carver. Okay, so that's that's set for the next bit. Okay, so this is, it's all smoothed off now, all cleaned up, all the plaster's set. Now I want to make sure that I'm going to apply a separator to this. I'm going to use sodium alginate or cold mould seal, because I'm going to put another type of plaster on top of this, and the like materials will stick together unless I separate it. So sodium alginate is just a fluid material, and I can paint it on with a brush. I only need it to go onto the plaster, so it doesn't need to go onto the wax or the teeth. But if you do get a little bit on there, don't worry too much about it. And then any excess I can allow to run off, but just make sure that you coat all the plaster, every bit of the plaster. Run the excess away. If you don't remove the excess, it can congeal in the little pockets and little bits at the bottom, and then the next lot of plaster that goes in there won't run in and make a perfect model of what we want. So the next part of this, I'm going to use some dental stone and some white plaster. I'm using the dental stone because it's a little bit finer, a little bit harder, gives a better surface detail. So I wanted to run into all the gingival margins that we've contoured on the teeth. So I've just put it, it's probably about a 75-25 in favour of the yellow, stone. Make sure you mix all the lumps out of it. And then I'm just going to apply to the tops of the teeth. And to make sure that I get it in, I'm just going to use my finger and I'm going to just rub against the teeth. Trying not to rub the plaster because I've put the mould seal on there, so I don't want to rub the mould seal away, so the separator. So I just want to make sure that it goes all the way to the bottom, rubs into the tooth surfaces. Put some over the top of those teeth. You can just vibrate it on the desk. And the other half, the excess in there. There we go. And allow that to set a little bit before I push the two halves together. Okay, so I've just filled that half. Both halves are now filled with plaster. This one's got the model in it. I'm just going to turn this over and invert it onto the other one. So do it very carefully. And I just want to make sure that I push the two halves together and I squash it down and then press out all the excess. There. Now I'm going to leave that to set. I'll just leave it to set on the desk. Okay, so after 5 minutes, I just leave this on here. I don't bother cleaning it off at all. And then it should set. And now I can just break the excess away. And that can just be swept into the bin. And then this can go into the boil out machine. And I'm going to put it in there for 5 minutes. Okay, so I'm just going to mix the acrylic. So methyl methacrylate, this is the monomer. And I don't need a lot of this. I'm mixing this in high impact acrylic, which is slightly stronger. And this is the methyl methacrylate powder, so the polymer. And this is usually one part liquid to 3 parts powder. This particular type of acrylic needs a lot more powder, always seems to need more powder to mix. You always think that you've put too much powder in there, but generally you just need to, it needs to be quite grainy when it's mixed and not as fluid as other materials. And this should be okay. Okay, so I've taken it out of the boil out machine now. I've been running boiling water over it for about 7 minutes, so it should have softened the wax up inside. So very carefully prise up and lift it clear, and you can see now the wax has gone molten. So I'm going to get rid of all that, tip the excess wax off there. And you can see now that because I encased the chrome in there, it's being held within. If I'd not encased it in there, all that chrome would come out now, it'd be loose. So I'm going to put it into the holding cage and place that back into the boil out machine and spray boiling water over it for a couple of minutes just to remove all the wax. There we go. And I can put the hand spray on. Build up the temperature and then lightly go over and get rid of all the excess wax. Now you can sometimes tip detergent on them at this point, but I put detergent in the machine anyway so it doesn't need it, and that'll just get rid of any residual wax on the surface. That should be okay now. All the wax boiled out now off those. Still very hot, these flasks, so you can't touch them with your hands. So again, now this is going to need a good 5-10 minutes to cool down, and then I can then start thinking about putting the sodium alginate and separating these halves, but I'll let this cool first. All boiled out. Important now to remember, you've got to remove these little feathered edges very, very carefully. These are just the little bits of plaster that we couldn't wash off completely. When the wax boils out, it leaves it and the little sharp edges, and if we don't remove it, it all falls into the acrylic later, and then you can end up with inclusions. So we've got to remove these, making sure that we don't touch the model and damage it in any way. And what I do now is I just rinse that off. Get rid of water. Okay, so I'm going to use some sodium alginate now, and I'm going to paint it. Okay, so mould seal the sodium alginate both halves, making sure that you get plenty on there. Get rid of the excess. Plenty in on the teeth. Paint all the plaster. Make sure you get all down the tip, and then get all these little bits off that have fallen in there, and again get the excess off. Okay, so this is the methyl methacrylate now that's packed, and it's got to the stage now where it's not sticking to my fingers, so it's ready to be placed into the moulds. So we packed this at what they call the dough stage. And this needs to be packed in 2 halves. So we pack the part over the chrome, there, so all the chrome bit gets packed over, and then also over the teeth. There. And there. We're going to do a trial pack, so we use cellophanes. So we use 2 cellophanes now, 1 on each half. So there's 1 for the bottom half, 1 for the top half. Close the 2 together. And then press the excess out. I just use a bench clamp, glass clamp. Do it gently. You've got to get excess coming out of here. So I need to create a flash, otherwise we can risk getting porosity into the dentures. So the good thing now that when it's got the cellophane on there is I can open it back up and I can see there's a flash on both halves. Remove the cellophane and all the excess. Now, this one again, remove the cellophane, and again, and I'm going to close the 2 together, put it back inside the clamp, and I'm going to clamp this up as tightly as it will go. Okay, and that's it. So that's clamped up now under pressure. Keep that pressure on. I'm going to put it into the boil out machine. I'm going to soak it, heat soak it for 30 minutes. So that'll go into the machine at about 60 degrees for 30 minutes, 50 degrees to 60 degrees. And then after 30 minutes, I'm going to put it onto boil for 1 hour. So 100 degrees for an hour. And that should be sufficient to cure it. So that's the cycle I'm going to use.